Hi, I'm Osi Osgood, and welcome to this video on film stock, film fade, and how to properly store fading prints, or prints that have the potential of fade. I'm going to be your tour guide on this little history of Super 8, and I welcome you to this video. Package films for Super 8 were not like home movies. For instance, Kodachrome was used for most home movies, and there was Ektachrome and a lot of different types of film. These films were low-fade film stocks. Almost all the home movie film stock was low-fade film stocks. However, package movies such as Warner Brothers, Disney, whatever, were usually made on film stocks that could or could not have film fade, and that's what this video is about. There's basically three types of film stock on both sides: good fade, or a good film stock, and bad film stock. And we're going to talk about those three main film stocks. We're going to start with the good film stocks. Let's talk about the good film stocks here. There's basically three good film stocks, and they all came around well, except for Agfa. They all came around the late 70s into the early 80s. Now, the good film stocks are, in general, Agfa, Eastman LPP, and Fuji film stock. Now, some people have prints that have faded on Fuji, but as a general rule, it tends to be a good film stock. So let's look at the first of these three film stocks. Agfa film stock was a film stock that was originally called Ansco-Chrome way back in the 40s and 50s, and it was later renamed Agfa film stock. Agfa film stock has a wonderful color saturation, and from what I have experienced, tends to have more close to the original colors than other low-fade film stocks. It tends to have better color saturation and a better overall look. I've compared, for instance, LPP film stock prints and Agfa film stock prints of the same title, and I've tended to see that the Agfa film stock prints tend to have a more accurate representation of the original colors. Now, bear in mind, the colors represented on any film stock are always subject to whatever the original camera negative color was, or whatever negative they used. For instance, if you have a very red faded negative used on a good film stock, the good film stock's only going to show whatever colors were available on the negative. So if you have a red fading negative used, the film stock, even if it's a good one like Agfa, is going to have red fadey colors as well. Eastman LPP, LPP standing for long fade process, is a very good low fade film stock. To this day, just like with Agfa, to this day I have never ran into a faded LPP film stock print. Agfa, I have heard from one collector, can fade. In my personal opinion, I've never ran into an Agfa film stock print that has ever faded. But like Agfa, LPP film stock is just that, low fade film stock, and to this day I've never run into a single LPP film stock print that is faded. Now, unfortunately, sometimes LPP film stock can have a bluish cast to the colors, but some film hobbyists, and I tend to agree with them, say that that could also possibly be because of, one, the film lab. In other words, if the film lab uses chemicals that bring forth a more bluish overall color spectrum to the print, no matter how good the print stock is, it's going to have that bluish color to to the overall color spectrum, and that has been noticeable sometimes in later LPP film stock prints. But it does tend to be a very good low fade film stock with decent colors. Once again, I prefer the AGFA over the LPP, but there's people on both sides of the spectrum on this subject. Fuji film stock has been around for a long time as well. And as a general rule, Fuji film stock prints do tend to hold up rather well. Now, Fuji has been known to fade. I've gotten from reliable sources from film collectors all over the world that depending where they are, it seems that the Fuji film stock fades. Either it's a very moist environment or a very humid environment, and the Fuji film stock prints tend to fade. I haven't run into that yet, but I tend to also store my Fuji film stock prints in a cool, dry place. But Fuji film stock tends to be very good, very accurate colors, and they tend to be very sharp prints as a general rule. This is an area where sometimes AGFA film stock is not as reliable. In UK prints that I've got of AGFA Disney titles, the AGFA color is just glorious, but sometimes it tends to be not quite as sharp as a Fuji film stock print or an LPP print. We'll now deal with the quick fade film stocks. The most notorious of these is the Eastman film stock that was produced from the 60s on up to about 1981 or 82. This film stock can very quickly fade to pink or red, losing the cyan blue color spectrum first, and then, or the dye, the cyan blue dye, and then the yellow disappears as well, until you're just stuck with a totally red, icky mess, reddish pink. So Eastman film stock before LPP is the most notorious, and it's a terrible film stock which can either fade very quickly or fade over a longer period of time. Now, I must say that there have been some pre-LPP film stocks that are Eastman that have held up very well. I have prints from 1969, 1972 on Eastman film stock, and these have not lost their colors at all. This may be due to better processing in film labs, longer saturation in the chemical baths. That might be why. Either that, or it was just, quite frankly, a very good Eastman film stock at the time. But the pre-1981-82 Eastman film stocks tends to be notorious for a pink-red mess over time. The next film stock I'd like to look at is Kodak SP. Now, Kodak SP, meaning special process, turned out not to really be so. Kodak SP film stock can last for a good long time. I have some Kodak SP film prints that haven't lost a single bit of color. But most of them by now have started to turn this terrible dingy brown. It starts out with a little brown affecting the blacks. Same thing with Eastman. The blacks are the first thing to go. And then over a process of time, it just becomes this terrible brown mess. That's what happens with Kodak SP. Most Kodak SP prints I've ran into these days does tend to have some bad fade. But you can run into decent Kodak SP prints. But I would try to get whatever film you're looking for on another film stock other than Kodak SP. Same thing goes for the fadey Eastman prints. I'd like to mention once again the Fuji film stock, as it is in both categories. Fuji can fade. Fuji tends to fade to the purplish side of things as it fades, getting more purple as time goes on. People have run into this. I've heard this from the UK and from other areas of the world. I have not run into fade on Fuji yet, but be forewarned, it can fade. Now we come to the fun part of this video, how to store film prints that will fade. Now, I ran across this specific style of storage by observing something in a film camera store. I noticed that all the raw film stock that is Kodachrome, Ektachrome for home movie shooting, all that Super 8 film stock was stored in a refrigeration unit, pardon me. And I asked them about that, and they said that the film stock tended to stay good for a lot longer if they stored it in a little refrigeration unit. So that clued me in to possibly doing this experiment for myself. So I decided to see what would happen if I would store film prints that were fading in a refrigeration unit instead of, just leaving them out at room temperature. Now, the most important thing you need to remember when it comes to storing film prints is use a cool, dry environment. Moisture is the worst possible thing for storing film prints. If you look at most archival houses, they keep all their film prints archived in a cool, dry place. Therefore, you need a cool, dry place. Now, obviously, most refrigerators are they are a cool place, but they're not necessarily dry. This is why the first thing you need to make sure of is that your refrigerator is a frost-free variety. Therefore, right there, you're going to have less moisture that can get to your film prints. But now, here's the important part. Take a large freezer bag like you'd usually use in a freezer, and take that freezer bag and put in it a silica gel packet. What are silica gel packets? Silica gel packets are what are put in products that keep moisture away from the product while it's going through storage and while it's sitting on the shelf where God knows where. I've saved every silica gel packet I've ever ran into. And what I do is when I put a film in the refrigerator, I go ahead and put a silica gel packet or two in the bag with the film. You see, silica gel packets are designed to keep moisture away from the product. What better thing to put in this bag with your films than silica gel packets? Not only are your films sealed within the freezer bag, but you also have the silica gel packet in there to also keep any other moisture away from your print. Now, does this procedure work? I did an experiment many years ago, 6-7 years ago, and it ended only about a year or so ago. What I did was I took two cartoons. Both were on the same film stock. Both had the same amount of color fade. I took one of them, put it in a small freezer bag because it was a little 200-foot cartoon, and with a silica gel pack in the bag. Then I left the other film print with the same amount of fade out on the shelf at room temperature. Over a period of 5 years, there was a striking difference. The print that was stored in the refrigerator was still retaining the same amount of colors with the film fade, but the same amount of colors as it did when I started this little process. The film print that was left on the shelf at room temperature had lost a remarkable amount of color in the same amount of time. Now, this is only my own procedure for saving fading film prints. But it worked on my behalf, and it will probably work on your behalf. But the important thing is keep the moisture away from your film print. That's the important thing. Keep it cool, but keep it dry. If you do this, there's a very good chance that you could enjoy those fading film prints with color for a lot longer than you would otherwise. Well, this has been Osi Osgood. I thank you for taking the time to watch this video, and I should hope that you have as much fun with your film collection as I do. And as I always love to say, long live Super 8.